I really don't understand why they don't sell these dust collectors like this. It would be so much simpler and they work so much better. So I know there's a bunch of videos out there on how to convert these, make a Thien Baffle. I watched all those a year or two ago, and when I started mine, I still wasn't 100% sure how well it worked. So I went ahead and I built mine and started to film it, and then I gave up partway through because I'm like, is this really worth it? But now that I've had it up and going for about a year, I realize, yes, it's definitely worth it. So I'm going to kind of show you a step-by-step as quick as possible of how I built my dust collection system. I did this over at a friend's shop, and you know, at the end, if you're not for sure how well this thing works, go to the very end, watch it, and I show it sucking up a lot of sawdust and how much it puts out. So before I waste a bunch of your time, I'm going to just get this through real quick. So right here, all I did is I got a plastic 55-gallon barrel. I really like these white or clear barrels, and you'll see why towards the end. But you can use the blue one. It's just you can't see what's in them. But with the white ones, you put a light behind it, and you'll see at the end, you can actually see how much stuff's in there. So on these barrels, if you see when you cut that lid off, there's like a thick little round dimple that sticks out right there. So what I did is I just kind of cut close to that with the jigsaw. You know, you can cut it with anything. And then I took a flush cut bit here on this little palm router and ran around with the palm router and got a nice smooth flush surface on the inside there. So once I ran around this with the router, got it nice and smooth on the inside, I went ahead and took my tape measure and I measured across. So these barrels, they're not perfectly round. You know, if they've been sitting around in the sun, had stuff in them. So you see here it's about 21, and then I come across on this side here and it's about 22 and a half. So what you want to do is you may want to measure around in a couple of different spots and try to get an idea for about just how big it is. You know, I always err on the side of being a little too large. So I went, got my measurement, and I cut a circle out. Now this little Miles Craft Circle Jig here, man, I've used all kinds of Circle Jigs in my life. And like I said, I was over at my buddy's shop, and he broke out this little thing here. And I do have to say, I love this little Miles Craft Circle Jig. You know, we cut out like 4 or 5 circles to do this project. And man, this thing is like 45 bucks. And as soon as I got back home, I bought one and had it in my shop. So these things are great if you don't have one. But anyway, get that measurement, go ahead and cut your circle out. And you know, you want to make it that it's snug in there. So if it's snug, you can always come back and cut it down a little bit. Now, I went ahead and left this in the video, but you've seen right there, I didn't have a good grip on that when I went to trim this down, and that thing kind of almost got away from me. So just be careful with that. You know, it's good if you had something like a non-slip surface, you can spin that around there, but I just ended up doing it with my hand. So all I did was set this about 1/4 inch and ran around it again to make sure that it was good and snug in there. And then I took a little round over bit. I always like either a chamfer or a round over. You'll notice in everything I do here, a round over so it makes a good, nice, tight fit. So now you see me take the lid that we just cut and try to make sure it's going to fit in there. Now, if you notice right here, you see me kind of struggling a little bit. I get a hammer and kind of bounce it in there, hammer it in a little bit. But once I get it in there, that's because the circle is kind of oblong. So then I just take the barrel, set it out there in the sun for a little bit, and you'll see later on it snaps right in like perfect. So once you get that one cut, you've already got your jig set up. You want to go ahead and cut another circle exactly the same size as the previous circle that you just cut. So now that we got our 2 circles cut, we're going to set those to the side for a second, and then we're going to start taking apart the actual dust collector. Now this is I think a Central pneumatic from Harbor Freight. Jet makes one, Grizzly makes one. Just about every one of your tool manufacturers, woodworking tools, make one of these dust collectors that look very similar to this, the same style. And you can do this on any of them. That's why I'm not giving the exact measurements, because even within the same manufacturer, these can vary just a little bit, but I'm showing you how I measured and where I got my numbers from. But now you see me taking this filter off, and this is one of the big things. This is almost brand new. This is my buddy's. He bought it, and you see in the bag down there, there's not even, you know, a good grocery sack full of sawdust down there. But yet that filter bag was almost completely full of this little powder, fine powder sawdust that just, you know, permeates in the air. And we're going to get rid of all that. So we're going to go ahead, we're just going to disassemble all this. If you buy it new, you know, you don't have to disassemble it, but we're just taking this all apart real quick. And this is another reason why this system is so much better than the factory configuration, is you see how everything goes through the turbine. You know, you got all those little wood fibers that are stuck right here. You know, with the new setup, you're not going to have to worry about none of that. So now we take a quick measurement across. You want to cut the circle so that it fits down inside of here. You know, it's nice and snug. You know, if you get a good fit on this, then you don't have to cock it. You know, if you cut it a little short, you can cock it. It's still going to work just the same. Now, I went ahead and I cut 2 circles. Now, this one here is going to fit nice and snug right down inside that little lip. And then you can go ahead, and you'll see later, I ended up having to notch it out because I made a second one, and that's basically just a spacer. And so if you want to go ahead and cut it about 2 inches shorter on the diameter, it'll miss the little flange. I'll point that out later. But, you know, I like to cut as many things as I can, you know, when I have the saw set up there, or the router in this case. So I went ahead and cut this one, and then I think it was about 15 inches. And then go ahead and cut you another one about 13 inches, and you'll be ahead of the game on that. And so as you can see, this thing fits nice and snugly. Just give it a little push and it snaps right down. No cock needed. Fits in there perfect. So now we can go and take our larger ring, the second one that we cut, and using the same settings, we can go ahead and cut the center of that out. If you want it to be nice and snug, you can bring your jig in about 1/4 of an inch, because what we want is we're looking for this outside ring to fit snugly around the outside of that metal little separator. So depending on the size router bit you're using, if you're using a 1/4 inch bit, so our other ring was just to the inside. Now the thickness of the metal is about 1/16 of an eighth of an inch, and then we're going to cut, you know, the outside diameter will be 1/4 inch larger, so we're actually going to be just a little bit loose. So what I did was I just moved in just a hair, you know, about maybe, like I said, 1/4 inch, and cut the inside of the circle out. So I went ahead and I split the ring just to make it a little easier to install. If your ring's a little loose, you can kind of get the metal to squeeze and let you get that in there. But I just went ahead, split it, and then I took a little ratchet strap, wrapped around it, and tightened that little, or this is a band-in strap, and tightened that up around it and squeezed it together. Once the glue dried, then it was just as good as it was when it was one piece. And then I went back and screwed from the inside into this ring so it would all hold nice and solid together, and shouldn't have any issues with that. Now here all I did was go ahead and take this little handle off. This handle will come in useful later, so don't lose your nuts. So there's the hole from the nuts, and I personally went ahead and drilled out all the little rivet holes for those little brackets that held that plastic bag on. And then I just went in here with some good, this is actually Gorilla Tape. On my other, I used actual duct, not DUK brand, but the duct DUCT. It's like the metal that they actually use for HVAC systems. It's a really sticky tape, and just kind of went in here, covered up any holes, because any holes you have is going to cause you to lose a little efficiency. And then also you want that air to flow nice and smooth around. So any kind of imperfection or whatever, I just kind of taped it off to make a nice smooth place for the air to flow. Okay, so once that's all taped up, it's time to actually make the Thien Baffle. This is what everybody loves. So the inside of that little metal has like a flange. It kind of angles out a little bit. So what I did here was I set my router bit just about 1/8 of an inch deep or so. And what I wanted was the metal flange. It kind of sticks up just a hair on the outside of the wooden ring there. So I want the wooden ring that's screwed to that metal flange to sit on top of the outside of this wooden ring perfectly. And so by cutting this little groove down right to the outside, that makes sure that it doesn't catch. So I went ahead, marked me a line straight across the center. Then I got a 90 and marked a 90 up and down. So now that I've got the circle marked into 4 quarters, 3/4 of the way around is the 270 degree of what makes the Thien Baffle. So I got my 270 degrees, and then I come in here and I take about 1.25 inch, 1.5 inch drill bit here, and I go ahead and drill my holes to where the end of the 270 degree groove is going to be at. And that way I have a nice round, smooth ending point, and then it's easy for me to set up my router to go around. Okay, now this is something a little different than the average person's. So the traditional Thien Baffle would just be set up your router and cut around between those 2 holes that we already drilled. Well, I find that mine, maybe because I'm down here in Florida and my shop isn't always atmospherically controlled, but the wood, even though I'm using I'm using a lot better plywood, but I was using some birch plywood on the one I had built that I've been using last year. And by this only having 45 degrees of the wood holding all the weight of that 3/4 inch center part, that it's tended to drop. Now it's only dropped maybe 1 inch over the past year, but on this one, what I went ahead and did is I marked me out about 1 inch between the 2 holes, and I drilled me 2 more holes here, and then cut my groove, leaving this little small bridge of wood in between. Then I went back under with the little router there, and I thinned it out to where it was only maybe about 1/8 of an inch thick. I rounded it off first so it has a nice round, smooth edge, and I cut back from the circle just to make it more of a what I feel is aerodynamic. It may or may not be more aerodynamic, but I figured that would should not be that little thin piece of metal or wood right there. Shouldn't affect the sawdust dropping down, but then this will keep this from the center part sagging if it's in a high humidity area over the next couple of years. All right, right here you see how we have the lines from our 90. Well, we want that intake to come straight in so that it's coming in that parallel line, and when it's making the curve is when the particulate's going to drop, and we want it when it's making that curve to be over our groove in the Thien Baffle. Okay, so don't let this confuse you. When I set this up here, it's not in the correct orientation as far as being turned. I was just trying to line it up and make sure that my groove was coming to the outside of where it slopes on the inside. That's where the air is going to flow down. I didn't want any little ridge sticking out right there. I wanted it to where it sloped, and all the particulate would just fall right out of suspension and be able to go into the bottom. Now it's time to cut the little small 5-inch circle that the suction's going to stick into. And this again is that little mousecraft jig. It comes with the one attachment to the big circles, and then you have this attachment here that does the small circles. It's just crazy at how well this little jig functions. Now, I'm not sponsored by them. My buddy paid for this one. Like I said, when I got home, I bought another one. I had to pay for that out of my pocket. It's just, I've built jigs and stuff before, and like I said, this little jig here just works so great to cut these circles with. And then, of course, like everything else I've done, I'm going to take my router and route over, do a little round over on that inside edge, just to make it nice and smooth. Now, here's where I was telling you about cutting the second circle a little bit smaller. So you see, I have that sticking through the little intake right here, and it sticks down about a 3/4 of an inch. So it'd be great just to put another 3/4 inch board on it and it come down flush. But as you see on the right hand side there, the exhaust is the little flange there was sticking up, so I had to cut a little notch in the corner. Like I said, it wasn't a big deal. Just cut that little notch there. But you know, if you did go back and cut the original one about 2 inches shorter, then it won't have to cut that little notch in the side like I did. And even though I had put glue on there, I went ahead and randomly put some screws down, and then I also came back from the inside and put a couple of screws just to make sure it all holds together good. Okay, so now the thing is built. It's just you know, all sets together. And so for mounting here, we had a plywood wall. So I ended up cut a couple of 2-3 pieces of 3/4 inch plywood. When I went through the first layer, I hit the screw head from the second one. But I just went and I got me some little lag bolts here, and I placed the whole unit on top of a piece of either 1/4 or 1/2 inch plywood, depending on how tight you build everything. And that lifts it up just a hair. And so then you screw your lag bolts in, and that's going to hold the motor pretty solid. But with just that little bit of 1/4 inch give, will compensate for any sag you have. Now that 15-inch circle that we had fit nice and snugly in top of the separator, we never put a screw in it, and here's why. So now I've got my motor mounted, but everything's fitting nice and tight. I still can rotate that bottom separator so that I can have my intake come in at the exact angle that I want. That can be spun around and it can come in at any angle. Once I have it set, now I'm going to come around here and put 2 or 3 screws in through the separator and the bottom piece of plywood. That's going to lock it all together. So this actually works fantastic. The little handle that we took off earlier, I said be sure not to lose your nuts on. Well, here I just went ahead and drilled a little hole. This plastic, you know, I just wanted to burr up on the end of this little drill bit I was using. But yeah, I put a couple of holes in here and was able to then mount the handle that was on the separator. Makes it so much easier to pull this barrel in and out to empty. Okay, so we're finishing up here now. We got the handle on the barrel. So you're going to end up taking your Thien Baffle. And originally I was going to put screws in here. I was going to put some weather stripping in, make sure it's a good tight seal. But once this thing goes in, you know, that barrel kind of stretches a little bit. And, you know, if you got a good fit here, you don't need any of that stuff. I had it there on mine. I didn't use it. You see how where I had placed the little piece of 1/4 inch plywood on the floor whenever I mounted the bolts on the motor above there. And so this is just barely sticking above the barrel and it just slides right under it. All right, so now I've got everything where I want it. I'm going to go ahead and everything's nice and lined up and flush. I'm going to drill a hole straight down through from my flange on my separator to the flange that goes around the outside of the Thien Baffle. And then what I do is come in from the bottom and I use some little T-nut inserts And you know, they're threaded, but they've got like a little washer head. I picked them up at the hardware store. They're only about 40-50 cents a piece. And then I can use a little, you know, knob and slide that in there. I don't know if you really need it. You know, everything's good. But if you did have just a slight gap, you know, where we put that 1/4 inch and you slide under, if there's a little bit that's not touching, once you tighten those little knobs down, that brings everything up nice and tight and makes an airtight seal. Okay, and that's it. You know, now I've got mine hooked up to where I got some little micro switches, so when you open a blast gates, it automatically energizes the system and it turns on the light behind there. And that way, anytime I walk by, I can see if my barrel's getting full of sawdust, because this thing will suck up so much sawdust and it'll fill up before you know it. But as you see, the exhaust right here on the left, nothing's coming out. It's just catching like all that sawdust I'm putting in, and as fast as I can do it in a handful. And when you're cutting with a saw, it's just a small amount coming at a time, not a big handful. So like I say, it's crazy at how efficient this thing is. So if you like it and you got something out of it, hey, give me a thumbs up, subscribe, you know, all the jazz. It really helps out a lot.